excited to interview you, being that you are a faculty member of UNO, which is a school I went to. By the way, I do have my UNO sweater on because I wanted to represent. And then also I'm excited to interview you because I haven't seen you in a long time. I graduated UNO in 2015. So it's been a while since I've spoken to anybody from the International Education Department. So I'm excited about this interview. First question I wanted to ask is a question that's going to take you back to the very beginning of your journey, because I feel like when we do the work that we do, whether it's through promoting other cultures or promoting social justice, there's always a start to that journey. And usually that's our upbringing. So where are you from?
Well, I am from Austria, which is a small Central European country, nudged between Germany and Italy. And that's where I was born and raised. I didn't come to the US until I was a college student, and I'm the only one in my family who left. So I have very strong ties still to my country.
How would you describe your upbringing in Austria?
Talking about my upbringing in Austria, I would say it was very happy, very safe, maybe rather sheltered. I would say I'm from a middle-class family. Both my parents were working, went to public schools, which is really the norm in Austria. But Austria is a rather uniform country in terms of ethnic and class diversity, fairly uniform. But it being so surrounded by other European countries, it's very easy to travel across borders. Everybody in Austria learns foreign languages from elementary school onwards and gets to use them, right? Within a couple of hours from Austria, you're in Italy or Hungary, Czech Republic. You can go to France easily on an overnight train. So a lot of Austrians and Europeans in general travel a lot across borders. And while the countries might be more uniform than the US, maybe I think they're exposed to more foreign cultures more easily and more regularly, maybe than Americans.
Yeah, because Austria has 8 million people based on a conversation we had, and New York City has 8 million people.
Right.
And, I think the US is the size of Europe as the continent, or even a little bigger. So for a lot of Americans, the whole idea of traveling to another country may seem daunting, considering that going from one part of the country to another is like going to another state. I mean, even going to Texas from Louisiana feels like going to another country sometimes. Well, speaking of going to another country and crossing borders, I mean, you are an Austrian who crossed borders. I read that you came to the US for the first time as an exchange student to New Orleans. So tell me about that experience of doing an exchange program in New Orleans.
Yeah, so I'm still at UNO, and UNO has a very active, very successful exchange program with the University of Innsbruck in Austria, which is my alma mater. And I was studying languages at the University of Innsbruck, English and French. And as such, I wanted to improve my English and was looking into exchange programs and came across the one with UNO, and I applied, and I got it. I got a scholarship, a graduate assistantship to come here to UNO in 1992. So that's how long ago that was, and fell in love with the city, with UNO, and with a certain guy. Got married and stayed. So not right away. I went back and forth for a couple of years, but I've been living and working in New Orleans now for over 20 years. Study abroad, exchange changed my life. Can truly say.
So when you got to New Orleans, what were you expecting? Because I feel like a lot of people outside of America see either New York, Los Angeles, and then maybe Chicago as like America, or like a Western or something, and then they come to America and it's something completely different.
Right. I think for Europeans, coming to New Orleans feels very comfortable because it's a very European city. It has a lot of history, a lot of French and Spanish history, and that's reflected in the architecture, in the food, in the people. It has an old town, which is what most European cities have. you go to the city center, you go to Old Town, and it has that old historic center that is not the norm in most American cities, which have their downtowns that are empty at night and on the weekends. So I think New Orleans is very, very easy to get used to fit into as a European. In terms of what I expected, it's been such a long time, I'm not sure, but I remember one thing that I was very surprised about actually was how siloed people were and are in New Orleans in terms of, I was talking about diversity there being less diversity in Austria as opposed to the US. And there's so much diversity here, but it seems to me that groups of people are very much in their neighborhoods, in their schools, in their churches, and there's not much mixing going on between rich and poor, black and white, and the different diverse groups that are here. And that is something that surprised me when I first came. I think mostly about schools, but in general, the life here. And I don't think that has changed much.
No, it has not. I'm not sure when you studied abroad, but I read that it was in the 90s, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so not a lot has changed since then in terms of that segregation issue. And in fact, there's actually been a lot of resegregation of a lot of public schools and across the country. And then also, we're in the South, so we have that history. And then another thing to think about is the fact that a lot of American cities are very segregated because of economics and things like that. So I would imagine that even for someone from Europe, where there are maybe a lot of diverse places within Europe, coming to America and seeing the diversity, but seeing the segregation may be very jarring.
No, I thought that was in the, that was in the past. That was civil rights movement and all that, and everything was, hunky dory. But that was surprising to me.
And how long have you been in the United States and specifically in Louisiana?
Just over 20 years. So I started working at UNO in 1999. So my career here at UNO has been just over 20 years, but then I had 2 or 3 years here as a student in addition to that.
So you came to America for the first time and you stayed.
Yep.
Wow, that is awesome. I always love hearing people come to this country from all over the world and actually feeling like this is home for them. I hope that with everything that's going on in the world, people still feel that this is a space where they can come and nurture America, improve it, make it better, learn from the history, create a future. I hope that people still feel that way, especially with all the different changes that have happened in the last couple of years and weeks.
Yeah, I've never really lived anywhere else in the US, so I don't have a good comparison in terms of how I've visited other places, but I haven't lived anywhere. But I feel New Orleans, I feel at home in New Orleans just as much as I do in Austria, I would say. People ask me, where's your home? What's home to you? I said both. I've lived probably about as long in America as I have in Austria. And I get to go back to Austria on a regular basis through my job, which is wonderful. I run the UNO-Innsbruck summer school for the University of New Orleans and take students to Innsbruck, Austria every summer. So that makes it easier for me, to keep my ties to Austria. But New Orleans is an easy place to call home. And of course, we have family here, big family, but even my friends have become family. And the hospitality here in New Orleans is something that is so wonderful, so easy to get used to. And sometimes to me, a little jarring when I go back to Austria, where people are more private and reserved. And sometimes it takes a little bit getting used to, reverse culture shock in my own country.
I mean, I'm from Baton Rouge, and Baton Rouge is only 70 miles from New Orleans. But even being in Baton Rouge, which is my home, my second home is always New Orleans because of how much diversity and hospitality and nurturing New Orleans gave to me being at UNO, which is coincidentally where I met you and met so many other people in the international education department at UNO. And you mentioned running the Innsbruck program. So I wanted to ask you a couple of questions about the Innsbruck program. And by the way, mention to people watching that another very significant connection that Austria has to New Orleans is that, diplomatically speaking, Innsbruck, Austria is a sister city to New Orleans.
Right.
So that's another thing to keep in mind. But tell me about the Innsbruck program. I know when I was at UNO, I studied abroad in France. I did the Glories of France program, but the Innsbruck program, I heard, was always a big hit. Like, it was one of the most popular programs among all the summer abroad programs at UNO. And also a lot of European exchange students tended to come from Germany and or Austria as well.
Yeah, so the sister city agreement between Innsbruck and New Orleans actually grew out of the friendship agreement between the two universities. So that came first and started in 1976 with the summer school, the UNO-Innsbruck International Summer School. That, so last year actually was supposed to be our 45th anniversary. And it was the first summer the program ever was not held since 1976 because of the pandemic. So we've had a 45-year run without interruption. And because it's been around for so long and so many people have participated in it, even from the very beginning, we've been taking 200 to 250 US students to Innsbruck every summer for the 6-week program, So we have over 10,000 alumni on that program. And if you mention Innsbruck in New Orleans at any gathering, very likely you'll run into somebody, oh yeah, I went on Innsbruck, my mom went on Innsbruck, my sister went on Innsbruck. So it's a very household name here in New Orleans or city. Maybe almost legacy of that program is very big, having affected so many people for so long. It's a 6-week summer program, which those kinds of programs are often referred to as island programs because you take a group of US students, bring them over there, and they tend to hang with each other and, not really integrate that much into the foreign culture because they're only there for 6 weeks. But we really try to get students out of that mindset. And we have a lot of programs, a buddy program with Austrian students. We have Austrian students in our classes in Innsbruck. The travel opportunities on this program, students travel on their own every weekend to different European destinations. We have faculty from the University of Innsbruck teach our students, guest speakers. The last couple of years, we've been able to bring in Holocaust survivors to talk to students after they go visit a concentration camp site outside of Munich. So we really try to expand that island program thinking and really get the students, even though they're only there for such a short time, get them acclimated, not assimilated, but integrated as much as possible into the foreign setting and culture.
I really wish that I could have done the Innsbruck program, but I literally had just done the France program.
Right.
And I know a little bit more French than I do German. So, yeah. but one of the most beautiful things I loved about UNO was that it was just so authentically diverse. It didn't feel forced. And I didn't know a lot of German people or Austrian people until after having done my time at UNO and also having, interacted with people who were part of the Austrian exchange and specifically with the Innsbruck, institution. And I just feel like that's something that we need to talk about more because when we talk about Louisiana, we don't talk about our global connections and we don't talk about the fact that we have always been globally connected. I mean, you're talking about this program in the Sister City Agreement started in the 70s. And now 5 decades later, that agreement still stands. How do you feel taking people to your homeland every summer? I mean, I know you talked about that in a personal lens of being able to stay connected, but how do you feel being able to go back home and to share your culture and your homeland with other people from different cultures every summer, excluding last summer. How has that been for you?
I feel fortunate, blessed to get to do that. It's an obvious choice to have an Austrian run this program. I'm connected there. I can arrange things. I speak the language, and all that works really well. But for me personally, to see students from the U.S. Come to my country, in many cases, especially with the UNO students, it's the first time they're abroad, the first time they're in Austria, first time often they're in Europe, and to see that light, that aha moment. It's like, because they're often scared or they've never been abroad, especially, as you know, people from Louisiana, New Orleans, they love to be home. They love their family, and a lot of them like, why would I ever leave? I don't want to leave, so it takes a little bit of nudging, but once they do, knowing that we're there with them, we're setting things up for them, they're taking classes, they're going with UNO faculty and staff, we can convince them to do that. And then when they do, and they have this eye-opening experience, like, well, this is a place that's not that different from home, and I can do this, and most people there speak English, so I can get by with my little German please and thank you and hello. And then they see that they can do this, and they often want to do more, like you said, you went to France, but you wanted to do more. And we actually have students who go on multiple international programs, or go back for a semester or a year, and there's many like me here who came to New Orleans and stayed. Many New Orleans and UNO students went to Innsbruck and stayed. I have a whole list under my desk of students who stayed and got married and had kids and started their families because of the UNO-Innsbruck connection.
And that within itself is a beautiful thing, because again, it just shows how much of a hospitable, welcoming spirit New Orleans has, which is not always common in other American cities, but it also shows just how America should be, a place that's welcoming and democratic and inclusive and open to so many different cultures. Another thing that I know you do is the Global Competence, I may be getting it wrong, the Global Competence Certificate, which I think debuted last year around the time during the pandemic. Right. Tell me about what the Global Competence Certificate is and why it exists.
Okay. So it is offered through AFS, AFS International Intercultural Programs, which is an organization that has been around since World War I. And actually AFS stands for American Field Service. And it was an ambulance service in World War I. And after the war, just reshaped itself and became one of the renowned and big international organizations offering student exchange. And I know a lot of students, a lot of colleagues here at UNO that have done AFS exchange, both from the US abroad and from Austria to the US, from different countries. So it's a really great organization. And they started this Global Competence Certificate many years ago as a tool to prepare students for study abroad. And I've always heard about it and, been interested in it, but we kind of do that ourselves. Like, we have a lot of orientation meetings with students, we prepare them, we go with them. So we really never had a need to offer that tool through a different organization. But last year, during the pandemic, and not being able to go abroad for the summer, taking students abroad, I participated in a lot of webinars and Zoom meetings and online conferences, and I came across this AFS tool, the Global Competence Certificate, again, in particular because they added a new module that's not only to prepare students for study abroad, but it's called the at-home module, taking into consideration that there is so much intercultural learning that can be done at home, especially here in the US, with all this diversity that we have around us. And it takes away the need and costs to travel. So you can learn global competence and intercultural thinking just by being here and observing what's around you. And that's what this new Global Competence Certificate module offers. And we are in the first class as we're speaking, so January 21. We have our first cohort, small group of UNO students, incredibly diverse, wonderfully diverse, ethnically, age-wise, major-wise. We have everything from freshmen to postdoc, all kinds of majors, all kinds of backgrounds. So it's wonderful to be talking about these concepts of intercultural learning with such a diverse group of UNO students. And we're hoping to grow that, bring it to more UNO students, bring it to more Louisiana students. There is a high school version of it as well. And I'm really intrigued in looking into that, offering to different high schools. So I think it's a wonderful tool, wonderful opportunity to teach intercultural learning. And if I may expand a little bit more, the other piece of it and how it all fell into place was I educated myself about the PISA program. PISA stands for Program for International Student Assessment. And it's an international student assessment, usually for to assess students' knowledge about math, language, science, things like that across the world. And that's done every couple of years, and it's offered by the OECD. And recently, when they do the assessment, they've added another component, and the most recent one in 2018 was global competence. And so they try to assess global competence for students all across the world, and found out that global competence can be taught, not just caught. Usually when you travel, you catch global competence. You are in situations where you have to learn, right? But you can also teach it, and that they're in this increasingly interconnected world, that there is a real need to teach that and to introduce that. And one way of doing that is to train teachers. It has been shown that if teachers are globally competent, they will pass that on to their students in K through 12 schooling, but also through tools such as the Global Competence Certificate through AFS.
I have a whole zoo going on in the background, but there's like birds, and I'm like, what's going on? Like, it's crazy. Yeah. But by the way, if you see me looking down, it's not in my phone, it's not my notes. I take notes while I'm interviewing, and just so I can, catch things and details. That's why.
I'm very tactile. I pay better attention when I take notes. So.
Yeah, right. Me too. So what I'm observing is this idea of the certificate kind of living in a both and context, because a lot of times when I talk about intercultural education, the first thing that many people think about is travel. And many people assume that the only way to experience or understand another culture is through travel, which isn't necessarily the most accessible or accurate thing to have, because number one, when it comes to travel, first of all, travel isn't, as you said, accessible to everybody. It costs money, it takes time. And also, there are a lot of heads of state who may not be the most tolerant or accepting of other people who travel a lot. Right. And so, travel shouldn't be the only other way to experience another culture. And I'm glad that this exists to get people to think about culture beyond hopping on a plane and going to another country or even another region of the country, but looking around your environment and exploring the diversity in your own cultural proximity. Another thing that I am hearing is that the certificate the program was birthed during the pandemic, also kind of during that summer-fall transition period. And one of the things that happened during the summer, last summer specifically, was this international reckoning with racism, where there were protests all over the world with regards to racial injustice, not just in America, but just in the world in general. I mean, I actually saw pictures of protests in Vienna regarding what was going on in America and other racial injustices that may be in Austria. And one of the biggest critiques I've had of international education is that sometimes culture and social justice don't intersect, meaning that people experience another culture, but they distance themselves away from the issues that are related to culture. So you go to another country and you experience the food and the music, but you don't get to talk about the actual issues that vulnerable populations experience in that culture. And oftentimes, in my own personal experiences, it's been very hard to talk about social justice issues in international education, officials and professionals and things like that. But after the summer, you started to see a lot more international education, professionals and teachers and administrators actually talk about doing, sensitivity training on systemic racism, talking about like other forms of identity, like religion and gender and things like that, especially to international students. So what role has social justice played in this international education work that you all are doing, and in this intercultural education work that y'all are doing at UNO?
That's a very good question. And I've been grappling with that for a long time, but like you said, especially since last summer, and all of the events around the Black Lives Matter movement and all the protests and things like that. And so here I am from an Austrian country, taking from a small European country called Austria, taking students to Austria. And I'm thinking, how can we make this connect? And the intercultural learning tool is one side of it, because like you said, general intercultural understanding helps. But Austria has a very specific history of World War II and the Holocaust. And I think there is a connection there in that Austria had to come to terms with that history of the Holocaust. And I don't know how familiar you are with World War II history, but Austria was annexed by Germany, by Hitler. And for a long time after the war, it portrayed itself as the victim. Like we were the small country who were taken over by Germany, by Hitler. We're the victim, and we didn't really do anything to deserve this. But that wasn't true. Austrians very, very willingly welcomed Hitler and the Nazis into Austria and participated in the Holocaust. I graduated from high school in 1988, 50 years after 1938, the end of World War II. And I feel like that's when it started to break open a little bit in Austria because of that anniversary. And there was so much reckoning going on at that point about, we weren't the victim. We have to own up to this. We have to, make public apologies and make sure that this history is taught, and that these concentration camps become museums and people can, learn about this. And going through this, and I think Germany obviously had to do the same thing, but much, much earlier, much faster, because it was a lot more obvious that they were the perpetrators there. And I think Austria has something to offer to American students in that respect, in how we have dealt with this really difficult history, whereas the United States has different difficult chapters in its history, especially around the history of slavery and segregation. And I'm actually borrowing this idea from Brian Stevenson. I don't know if you're familiar with him. He's the founder of the Equal Justice Initiative and author of the Just Mercy book, which I read and found fascinating. Also the founder of the Legacy Museum in Birmingham, Alabama. And one of his lectures that I read, he makes that connection that Germany had to come to terms with its genocide history, Holocaust history, and I want to include Austria in that. Rwanda had to come to terms with its genocide, South Africa with apartheid. And he says that the United States really hasn't had that reckoning yet, that really coming to terms and owning up to it, which is why he started this Equal Justice Initiative and this museum. And I'm not an American, and I don't want to sound like I'm telling Americans what they need to do, but I think as a European and as an Austrian with this perspective of the Holocaust and how we had to process that as a country and as a people, I think it can provide some insights for American students that are coming to Austria to learn about this. And I think that this connection can definitely be made, and can be a good learning tool.
Well, to follow up to that, I mean, I have some knowledge of World War II history thanks to some of the amazing history teachers at UNO. And one of the things that I really enjoyed about learning World War II history is how complex it was. And I think a lot of people don't understand that a lot of European countries participated in the Holocaust, not just Germany. I mean, France with Vichy France, Italy. There were French Jews who were killed from the Holocaust. There were also Italian Jews. There were Eastern European Jews. There were Jews in the Netherlands and in Denmark. Like there were certain countries that maybe have been more resistant, but a lot of countries participated, with the exception of I think Russia, participated in this genocide. And also the genocide impacted not just Jewish people, but it impacted, you know, the Roma. It impacted political prisoners. It impacted homosexuals. I even read an article about Black Germans who were killed as a result of the Holocaust. Like this genocide wasn't just one person or one country inflicting this onto other people. It was something that a lot of countries participated in. And also there were a lot of things that happened that led up to that. So a lot of authoritarian fascist things that happened in Nazi Germany that resulted in the Holocaust being the end product of that. It didn't just occur to Hitler to do this atrocity. There was gradually a breakdown of society to where it was happening. And I mean, even America may not have participated in it in the same way that Europe did, but America turned away a lot of people escaping the Holocaust and sent them back to Europe, you know, during the 40s. So that's another, you know, history that we have to kind of learn as well. And as far as reconciling that history goes, America has never had a truth and reconciliation. You know, I think that that is because of the fact that America kind of has been divided geographically and regionally after the Civil War. It's like the north of the country had its own thing going on and the south had its own thing going on. And even when we try and talk about race, there's always this push against it because for, you know, fear of being divisive or fear of being polarizing. But if you look at the data and you look at the hard numbers, these disparities exist among people of color in this country. And I think that it's important to have voices like yours and have international perspectives as well as international learners to learn about this history, because America's history isn't the same as someone else's history. And we have to be seen uniquely, but there's so much that America can learn from other countries as to how to process that history. I want to kind of ask some more wrap-up questions that are more positive and a little bit more uplifting, because talking about injustice can be a bit depressing, but talking about solutions can be very empowering. And you've been in Louisiana and in America for a while. You've been in America just as long as I've been in America, and I was born here. So like, I feel like you have enough currency to talk and give your perspectives. I know that you're someone who's very much into teaching people about other cultures, and you're actively bringing people from America and from Louisiana to another country to learn about another culture. So with that being said, what are some things that you feel needs to be done to improve life for people in South Louisiana and also improve life for American people?
Apart from international learning and international exchange, another one of my passions is to teach people about, or to teach by example in terms of environmental concerns. I think that is something that Louisiana still has a long way to go. The US in general, but especially Louisiana, especially compared to European countries. But people in Louisiana are going to be so much affected by climate change. You know, with the land loss we already have, I really hope that people get on board more along those lines. And I am really inspired to teach about recycling and what we can do to bring down carbon emissions and things like that. I'm really inspired by my children because they are ultimately inheriting this world from us, and they're actually very worried about it. My 13-year-old daughter tells me all the time she's worried about global warming and all these hurricanes, and summer's getting so much hotter. That's really noticeable in Europe. Nobody in Austria has air conditioning, but the last couple of summers we've been there, it was almost necessary because it's been so hot. So, and I know it is so daunting because you think as an individual, you can't make a difference because it's all these big companies and all these governments and all these policies have to change, and you're not really going to have an effect. But that's not how we can think. We cannot think like that. We have to start with ourselves, and there's so much you can do. And I really enjoy talking about that to people and about ideas. And my daughter has all kinds of ideas, and she follows Instagram accounts about zero waste and whatever. And I get really excited when we go shopping to the bulk store and use no plastic bags, come home from the farmer's market with, fresh produce. And so that's something that I want to be more involved in. Haven't really found the right platform yet, other than constantly talking to my friends and family about how they can eliminate plastic, single-use plastic, and and of course, I'm in the travel business. I'm taking students halfway across the world, and flying is about the worst thing you can do. So I'm actually very interested in looking into offsetting some of these carbon emissions, ways on how we can offset these carbon emissions that are produced by flying. And I have some ideas, but first, let's see if we can actually travel next summer.
Well, travel is something that I feel is very important for us to do. But if we want to explore other cultures, then travel isn't the only way we can do it. And I really appreciate that focus on the environment that you have, because Louisiana does have a lot of environmental issues. And it sucks that our economy is so dependent on environmentally deleterious things like oil and other things. But I'm hoping that with the pandemic and the changes that we've had to make to our lives, we can also rethink our economies and just our relationship to the environment a lot more. Now that we aren't, polluting as much or traveling as much as we normally probably are used to doing. Well, Irene, thank you so much for taking the time to, be a part of the series and to share your experiences. It is always good to talk to a UNO connected person, whether it's an alum or a faculty member or a student, because I would have to say UNO owes me nothing. I had a wonderful experience. I love being at UNO. I miss the environment that I was surrounded in when I was at UNO. And on top of just being happy to talk to a UNO admin who I haven't seen in a long time, I really appreciate the work that you all are doing to bridge the cultural gaps that exist between Americans and Louisianians and the rest of the world, because I truly feel that expands of Louisiana's roots to the world in so many ways.
Yeah. You're very welcome. Thank you for inviting me to do this. This was really fun.
I'm glad you enjoyed it. I'm glad that you did, because if you didn't, then I didn't do my job. So yeah, thank you so much.